Picture this. 1935. A young woman sits in her doctor's office, heart pounding, waiting for news. The doctor picks up the phone, dials the lab. "Did the rabbit die?" he asks. "Yes, the rabbit died." She bursts into tears of joy. She's pregnant. But here's what nobody told her. The rabbit always died. Every single time. Pregnant or not, that innocent creature was killed, dissected, examined. For 40 years, tens of thousands of rabbits were sacrificed just so women could know if they were expecting. This is that absolutely disturbing story. Welcome to Hearts and History. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Whether you're winding down from a long day or settling in for some peaceful sleep, you've come to the right place. Before we start this wild journey through pregnancy testing history, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy falling asleep to fascinating stories. And I'd love to know, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you cozy in bed? Walking at midnight? I love connecting with fellow history lovers around the world. Let's begin. Unveiling the enigma of pregnancy. Before home pregnancy tests, before blood work, before anything reliable existed, women lived in uncertainty. For most of human history, you couldn't know you were pregnant until your belly grew or you felt kicks. Think about that anxiety. Victorian women especially faced enormous pressure. An unmarried woman discovering pregnancy meant social ruin. A married woman desperate for an heir needed answers immediately, but science had nothing to offer except wild guesses, strange superstitions, and methods that seem absolutely insane today. This is where our story really begins. The Victorians inherited centuries of bizarre testing methods and somehow made them even stranger. Ancient civilizations had examined urine for thousands of years, looking for changes in color, smell, consistency. But 19th century doctors called themselves scientifica. They mixed urine with wine, inserted needles to watch them rust, examined women's eyes for mysterious color changes, checked pulses, studied complexions, advised women to store their urine and watch for mysterious films forming on top. None of it worked, yet these educated men insisted they had medical authority over women's bodies. Victorian society was obsessed with science, but terrified of bodies. Pregnancy was the family way, or being in confinement. The actual word pregnant was vulgar. Women disappeared from public life once they showed. Everyone knew what was happening. Nobody spoke it aloud. This created an impossible situation. How do you prepare for childbirth, arrange your household, plan for lying in if you can't confirm pregnancy early? Male physicians were taking over from midwives, claiming scientific superiority, yet despite fancy instruments and university degrees, they knew nothing more than traditional healers. Enter the Kyesteine pellicle method. Sounds impressively scientific, right? French doctors claimed if you collected a woman's urine and let it sit for days, you'd see an early pregnancy membrane, a sticky film that supposedly formed only in pregnant women's urine. Dr. Robert Kane in Philadelphia became famous for this technique. He'd solemnly examine these samples, looking for mysterious pellicles. His case studies reveal his arrogance. He describes patients like Helen Anderson, noting her promiscuous habits with obvious disapproval. Another patient, 15-year-old Maria Hero, borrowed neighbors' urine to hide her condition. Kane saw through it, but Kane and doctors like him knew their methods were unreliable. They needed something concrete, measurable, actually scientific. That breakthrough came in 1928 from two German gynecologists, Selmar Aschheim and Bernhard Zondek. Working in a Berlin hospital, they identified human chorionic gonadotropin, ACG, a hormone appearing uniquely in pregnant women's urine. This was the holy grail they'd searched for, but detecting it required a disturbing solution. They developed the AZ test. Collect urine from suspected pregnant women, inject it into 5 immature female mice over 5 days, kill the mice, dissect them, examine their ovaries. The test was astonishingly accurate, less than 2% error rate. For the first time ever, women could know they were pregnant within days of a missed period, instead of waiting months for physical symptoms. But every test meant 5 dead mice, always. Then Nazi power grew in Germany. Both Aschheim and Zondek were Jewish. They fled for their lives, Aschheim to Paris, Zondek to Palestine. Their discovery had already crossed the Atlantic, though. In 1931, American Dr. Maurice Friedman at University of Pennsylvania adapted their method. He made one crucial change. He replaced 5 mice with a single rabbit. The Friedman test worked exactly like the mouse version. Inject woman's urine into female rabbit's ear vein. Wait 48 hours. Kill rabbit, cut it open. Examine ovaries. If they showed hemorrhagic corpus luteum, bright yellow swelling, test positive. Woman pregnant. Rabbits became synonymous with pregnancy testing through the 30s, 40s, 50s. Tens of thousands sacrificed annually in American laboratories. Women would provide urine samples, then wait anxiously for days while samples travelled to labs. The cost was substantial, $10 to $15, equivalent to several hundred today. Only wealthy women could afford accurate testing. The rabbit died entered American culture completely. Most people had no idea what it actually meant. There was widespread confusion about whether rabbits only died for positive tests. Reality: every rabbit died. Whether woman was pregnant or not, you had to dissect them to examine ovaries, but somehow the rabbit died became code for announcing pregnancy. It appeared in 1947 noir novels about Black Dahlia murders. Humor writer Teresa Bloomingdale joked about it in her 1956 memoir. Gossip columnists used it to announce celebrity pregnancies. Aerosmith included it in Sweet Emotion lyrics. Even Billy Crystal's 1978 pregnancy comedy referenced it. This was medical progress in the early 20th century, killing thousands of animals so women could know they were pregnant a few weeks earlier. Nobody questioned whether there might be better ways. It was simply accepted as the cost of scientific advancement. The phrase also reveals Victorian delicacy about reproduction that persisted for decades. Even when animal testing peaked in the 50s, society still needed coded language to discuss pregnancy. The rabbit died. Let people announce reproduction without being explicit. Tomorrow we'll explore how this bizarre system finally ended and why some changes had unexpected consequences. The prudish pursuit of progress. Picture Victorian England, an era absolutely obsessed with scientific advancement, but also completely horrified by the human body. Women couldn't even say the word pregnant in polite company. They were in the family way or in confinement. Yet these same Victorians demanded medical precision about everything else. They measured skull sizes, catalogued butterfly wings, mapped ocean currents. But when it came to confirming pregnancy, pure guesswork, wrapped in fancy scientific language. This contradiction created some truly bizarre medical practices. See, the medical world was changing fast in the 1800s. Male doctors were pushing out traditional midwives, claiming they had superior scientific training. These university-educated physicians carried leather bags full of impressive instruments. They spoke Latin, they quoted medical textbooks. But here's the thing, they had 0 reliable ways to diagnose early pregnancy. None. A village midwife with 40 years of experience was probably more accurate than any fancy doctor with his diploma. But the doctors wouldn't admit that. Instead, they invented elaborate theories. Enter the Kyesteine pellicle method. Sounds scientific, right? The theory went like this. Collect a woman's urine, let it sit in a vessel for several days, then examine it for a mysterious film. This pellicle supposedly formed only in pregnant women's urine. Doctors would peer at these samples like they were reading tea leaves. The whole thing was nonsense, but it had that scientific ring to it. French physicians embraced this method with stunning confidence, despite its complete unreliability. Dr. Robert Kane in Philadelphia became somewhat famous for his pellicle expertise. He published case studies describing his diagnostic triumphs with obvious pride. One patient, Helen Anderson, Kane noted her promiscuous habits while treating her for gonorrhea. He triumphantly diagnosed her pregnancy through urine examination. Another patient, 15-year-old Maria Hero, tried to fool him by borrowing a neighbour's urine sample. Kane saw right through it and bragged about his detective work. Reading his papers today, the guy cared more about impressing colleagues than helping patients. Kane's attitude shows you everything about Victorian medical priorities. These women were vulnerable, scared, some barely teenagers dealing with unwanted pregnancies. But Kane wrote about them like lab specimens. He focused on proving his diagnostic brilliance to other male doctors. The actual welfare of these women, secondary concern at best. This wasn't healthcare, it was performative medicine. Kane wanted recognition, status, professional prestige. The pellicle method gave him a way to claim special expertise over something nobody really understood. The Victorian obsession with euphemisms made everything worse. Doctors couldn't speak plainly about pregnancy because society deemed it vulgar, so they invented elaborate coded language. Delicate condition, interesting situation, blessed event approaching. This linguistic dancing around reality made medical communication nearly impossible. How do you provide proper care when you can't even name the condition? Women suffered in silence while doctors whispered in Latin and examined mysterious films in urine samples. Science mixed with social prudery creates strange medicine. Here's what's wild about this era. Victorians were mapping galaxies, building railways across continents, discovering new chemical elements. They revolutionized physics, chemistry, biology. Yet pregnancy detection still stuck in medieval thinking. Doctors mixed urine with wine. They watched needles rust in sample jars. Some claimed they could diagnose pregnancy by examining the colour of women's eyes or checking their pulse patterns. None of it worked. But hey, at least it sounded scientific when they presented their findings at medical conferences. The social pressure made everything more desperate. An unmarried woman discovering pregnancy faced complete ruin. A married woman hoping for an heir needed confirmation as early as possible. Wives of wealthy men might need to plan elaborate lying-in periods, withdraw from society at the right moment, arrange household staff. But when could they start planning? When was it safe to hope or worry? The uncertainty drove women to try anything, including trusting doctors with questionable methods and obvious ego problems. The pellicle method's popularity reveals something darker about Victorian medicine. Doctors knew it didn't work reliably. They published papers admitting the inconsistencies, but they kept using it anyway because it gave them authority over women's bodies. It let them charge fees for their expertise. Most importantly, it maintained the illusion that scientific medicine was superior to traditional knowledge. Even unreliable science beat admitting that grandmothers and midwives might actually know more about pregnancy than university-trained physicians. Dr. Kane's case studies read like detective fiction today. He describes examining samples, making deductions, catching patients in deceptions. But notice what's missing. Compassion, understanding, basic human decency toward women facing difficult situations. Kane treats pregnancy like a puzzle to solve, rather than a human experience requiring care. His publications focus on his own cleverness, not patient outcomes. This was Victorian scientific medicine at its most arrogant, all performance, minimal substance, zero empathy for the actual people involved. By the 1870s, even Victorian doctors were getting frustrated with pellicle testing's failures. They needed something concrete, measurable, truly scientific. But that breakthrough was still decades away. For now, women remained trapped between social prudery and medical incompetence. Pregnancy stayed mysterious. Diagnosis stayed unreliable, and doctors like Kane kept publishing papers about their supposed expertise. The Victorians had built an empire, conquered diseases, revolutionized industry, but couldn't reliably tell if someone was having a baby. Progress has its limits, apparently. The pioneering German gynecologists. Picture this: Berlin, 1928. Two German doctors are about to crack the code that's puzzled humanity for centuries: how to know if someone's pregnant without waiting months for obvious signs. But here's the thing that gets me about this story. Their breakthrough would save countless women from uncertainty, yet it came with a price that nobody talks about anymore. 5 innocent lives, every single time. Selmar Aschheim and Bernhard Zondek had no idea their discovery would become both revolutionary and haunting. These weren't just any doctors. Aschheim was a gynecologist at Berlin's Charité Hospital, one of Europe's most prestigious medical centres. Zondek was his brilliant colleague, equally obsessed with solving the pregnancy puzzle. They'd spent years watching women come to their clinic, desperate for answers. Am I pregnant or not? The uncertainty was killing these women emotionally. And the doctors, they had nothing reliable to offer, until they started looking at something everyone else ignored: urine. Not the colour or smell like the Victorians. Something invisible. What they found changed everything. Deep in the urine of pregnant women, they discovered a hormone that existed nowhere else in nature. Human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG for short. This stuff only showed up when a woman was carrying a baby, never any other time. Think about that for a second. After thousands of years of guessing, examining wine mixtures, watching for mysterious films on urine, these two Germans found the actual chemical signature of pregnancy. The Holy Grail was real, but finding it was just the first problem. Here's where it gets tricky. You can't just look at urine and see HCG. It's invisible to the human eye. No microscope in 1928 could detect it directly. So how do you prove it's there? Aschheim and Zondek needed something that would react to this hormone, something living that would respond in a measurable way. They tried different approaches, different animals, different methods. Then they hit on something that worked. Something that makes my stomach turn a little bit, honestly. But it worked perfectly. The AZ test, named after their initials. Here's how it worked, and brace yourself because this part's disturbing. They'd take 5 young female mice, healthy, immature mice whose reproductive systems were still developing. Then they'd inject the woman's urine directly under the mice's skin. Not once, 5 times over 5 days, each mouse getting multiple injections. The mice had no idea they were about to become pregnancy detectors. The doctors would wait, observe, take notes. Then came the part that sealed the test's fate. Day 5, time to check the results. But here's the thing, you couldn't just observe the mice and know. The only way to see if the HCG had worked was to kill them. All 5, every single time. Aschheim and Zondek would sacrifice the mice, then carefully dissect them to examine their tiny ovaries. If the ovaries were enlarged, if they showed signs of recent ovulation, bingo, the woman was pregnant. If the ovaries looked normal, she wasn't. The accuracy was incredible. Less than 2% error rate. This was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, women could know they were pregnant within days of a missed period. Not months of waiting and wondering. Days. The AZ test could detect pregnancy earlier than any method before or since. Women were flooding into clinics, desperate for this certainty. Doctors were amazed by the reliability. Medical journals called it a breakthrough, but nobody was talking about the cost. 5 mice died for every woman who wanted to know, every single test. The math was getting dark quickly. Think about what this meant. Thousands of women seeking pregnancy tests meant thousands of dead mice. Weekly, the mice weren't dying peacefully either. They were healthy young animals, killed in their prime for dissection. Laboratory workers became accustomed to the routine slaughter, cages full of mice, waiting their turn. Some techs tried not to think about it, others quit, but the demand kept growing. Women wanted answers, and this was the only reliable method available. The mice kept dying. Nobody had a better solution. The ethical weight of this discovery is staggering when you really think about it. Every positive pregnancy test meant a woman's life was about to change forever. But it also meant 5 small lives ended. There was no other way. The technology didn't exist to detect ACG without living tissue reaction. Aschheim and Zondek had solved the pregnancy detection problem, but they'd created a moral dilemma that nobody wanted to discuss. Progress always has a price. In this case, the price was measured in tiny heartbeats that stopped beating. By 1930, laboratories across Europe were using the AZ test. The mouse mortality rate was astronomical. Breeding facilities couldn't keep up with demand, but women finally had certainty. They could plan their lives, seek prenatal care early, make difficult decisions about unwanted pregnancies. The test was giving women control over their futures in ways their grandmothers never imagined. Yet that control came at a cost that weighed heavily on anyone who stopped to count the casualties. Science was advancing, ethics were lagging behind. Then something happened that changed everything. Not scientific progress, but politics. Both Aschheim and Zondek were Jewish. As Nazi power grew in early 1930s Germany, their groundbreaking research came to a terrifying halt. They were forced to flee for their lives. Aschheim escaped to Paris. Zondek made it to Palestine. Their life-saving discovery scattered across the globe with them. But the AZ test was already crossing the Atlantic. American doctors were about to make it even more controversial and oddly more famous. The arrival of the rabbit test. 1933. Berlin is burning, and 2 brilliant Jewish scientists are running for their lives. Aschheim and Zondek, the men who revolutionized pregnancy testing, pack their research and flee Nazi Germany. Their groundbreaking AZ test abandoned, their laboratory shuttered. But here's what's fascinating. Their discovery doesn't die with their exodus. It crosses the Atlantic, gets into the hands of Maurice Friedman at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's about to make one crucial change that will define pregnancy testing for the next 30 years. Friedman looks at the AZ test and sees a problem. 5 mice per test. That's expensive, inefficient, hard to manage. So he makes a swap. 1 rabbit instead of 5 mice. Same principle. Inject the woman's urine. Wait, then examine the ovaries. But rabbits are bigger, easier to handle, and the results are clearer. The Friedman test is born, and it's brilliant, accurate, revolutionary. But there's still that dark reality nobody talks about. Every single test means 1 dead rabbit. Whether positive or negative, that bunny doesn't survive. Here's how it worked. You're a woman in 1935. You think you're pregnant. You visit your doctor, provide a urine sample. That sample gets shipped to a laboratory where a technician injects it into a female rabbit's ear vein. Then they wait, 48 hours exactly, time enough for the hormones to work their magic, or not. After 2 days, the rabbit goes under the knife. They cut her open, expose those ovaries. If they're swollen and bright yellow, congratulations, you're expecting. If not, well, you still killed a rabbit for nothing. The test was astonishingly accurate. Less than 2% error rate. For the first time in human history, women could know they were pregnant within days of a missed period. No more waiting months for their bellies to swell. No more relying on Victorian quackery and wine mixed with urine. This was real science, real answers, real certainty, but it came with a price tag that went beyond money. Laboratories across America started ordering rabbits by the thousands. Breeding farms couldn't keep up with demand. The pregnancy testing industry was literally built on rabbit bones. And then something weird happened. The phrase started creeping into everyday language. The rabbit died. At first, only doctors and lab technicians knew what it meant. But somehow, it leaked out. Women started using it as code, a way to announce pregnancy without saying the word pregnant. Because remember, this was still an era where polite society found direct references to reproduction a bit uncomfortable. The rabbit died became the euphemistic way to share the news, and most people had absolutely no idea what it actually meant. By the 1940s, the rabbit died was everywhere. Noir novels used it. Gossip columnists announcing celebrity pregnancies wrote it. It showed up in casual conversation, in letters between friends, in whispered conversations at bridge clubs. The phrase took on a life of its own. Hollywood caught on too. Writers loved it because it sounded mysterious, scientific, but also somehow gentle, like the rabbit had made some noble sacrifice, which I guess it had, just not voluntarily. The cultural phenomenon was bigger than the science that created it. But here's where it gets really weird. Most people thought the rabbit only died if the test was positive, that somehow pregnancy was what killed the rabbit. Women would say, "I hope the rabbit doesn't die," when they didn't want to be pregnant. Or, "I'm waiting to see if the rabbit dies," when they were hoping for a baby. The confusion was everywhere. Even educated people got it wrong. They thought the rabbit's death was connected to the pregnancy result, when in reality, every rabbit died. Pregnant or not, that bunny was doomed the moment they decided to test. And here's where the class issue becomes crystal clear. The Friedman test cost between $10 and $15. That's several hundred in today's money. Only women with means could afford it. If you were wealthy, married to a doctor or businessman, you got certainty. You got to plan. You got prenatal care from the moment you knew. But if you were working class, a factory worker's wife, a domestic servant, you waited, watched for symptoms, hoped your period would come back, or hoped it wouldn't. The rabbit test was a privilege, not a right. The disparity was brutal. Rich women knew they were pregnant at 4 weeks. Poor women found out at 4 months. Rich women could make decisions, prepare their households, seek medical care immediately. Poor women just dealt with whatever happened. The rabbit test created 2 completely different experiences of early pregnancy in America. One defined by knowledge and choice, the other by uncertainty and hope. The same country, the same decade, but totally different worlds depending on whether you could afford to kill a rabbit for an answer. Laboratories couldn't keep up with demand. By the late 1940s, they were processing thousands of tests weekly. Rabbit breeding farms started specializing just for medical testing. Entire industries built around this bizarre relationship between women's reproductive uncertainty and rabbit mortality. The phrase "the rabbit died" appeared in Aerosmith lyrics decades later. It was referenced in comedy routines, novels, casual conversation. A generation grew up knowing the phrase without understanding its literal meaning, cultural shorthand for pregnancy that outlasted the test itself. But beneath all the cultural phenomenon, all the clever phrases and scientific breakthroughs, was this sobering reality: access to knowledge was determined by wealth. The woman sitting anxiously in her doctor's office in 1935, hearing the rabbit died and bursting into tears of joy, she was privileged. Privileged to know, privileged to plan, privileged to afford certainty, while countless other women lived in uncertainty, waiting for their bodies to reveal their secrets in their own time. The rabbit always died, but not every woman got to benefit from that sacrifice. The disconcerting cultural embedment. Here's where this story gets really weird. By the 1940s, something bizarre had happened. The phrase "the rabbit died" had completely escaped the laboratory. It was everywhere. Noir novels, gossip columns, casual conversation. People used it to announce pregnancies without even understanding what it meant. Most folks thought the rabbit only died if you were pregnant. They had no clue that every single rabbit was killed, every single time. Whether you were expecting or not, that bunny was doomed the moment your urine hit the syringe. Think about that for a second. An entire generation grew up using this phrase without knowing they were casually referencing mass animal slaughter. It's like saying break a leg to wish someone luck, except nobody realised the leg actually got broken every time. The disconnect was staggering. Women would tearfully call their mothers, "The rabbit died, I'm pregnant." Meanwhile, in some laboratory across town, a technician was literally dissecting a rabbit that would have died regardless of the test results. The phrase showed up in the strangest places. In 1947, there's this noir novel about the Black Dahlia murder, dark stuff. But right in the middle of all that violence, a female character looks at a man and says simply, "The rabbit died." No explanation needed. Readers understood immediately. Pregnancy announcement. The phrase had become so embedded in American culture that authors could drop it into murder mysteries, and everyone got the reference. That's how deep this thing had penetrated popular consciousness. Teresa Bloomingdale. Now this woman had a sense of humour about the whole thing. She wrote a memoir about having 10 kids, and she opens with this perfect exchange with her obstetrician. "What do you mean the rabbit died? Doesn't the rabbit always die in a pregnancy test?" The doctor replies, "Not this one. I had just completed the injection when the dumb bunny jumped off the table and killed herself. Even he's joking about it. The rabbit literally committed suicide rather than face dissection." Dark comedy, but people laughed. By the 1960s and 70s, the phrase was everywhere. Joan Rivers's pregnancy got announced in a gossip column, "The rabbit died." Aerosmith put it in Sweet Emotion, "You can't catch me, 'cause the rabbit done died." Rock lyrics about pregnancy tests. There was even a 1978 comedy movie called The Rabbit Test, starring Billy Crystal as the world's first pregnant man. The phrase had become so culturally significant it could anchor an entire film. Nobody questioned where it came from anymore. What's really unsettling is how casually society accepted the animal sacrifice. Thousands upon thousands of rabbits, mice, frogs, all killed in the name of pregnancy testing. And nobody batted an eye. It was just progress, science, the cost of medical advancement. Doctors talked about it, matter-of-factly, in medical journals. Women scheduled these tests, knowing an animal would die, and they felt no guilt about it. It was simply how things worked. The rabbit's death was as routine as drawing blood. The strangest part? Most people using the phrase had zero idea what actually happened in those laboratories. They thought the rabbit died meant the rabbit keeled over from shock or excitement when exposed to pregnancy hormones, like the animal was so overwhelmed by the news that it fainted. The reality, surgical dissection of living creatures, that part never made it into polite conversation. People wanted the convenience of early pregnancy detection without thinking too hard about the mechanics. This ties back to Victorian attitudes about bodies and reproduction. Even in the 1950s, pregnancy was still discussed with incredible delicacy. You didn't say pregnant, you were expecting, or in the family way, so the rabbit died became this perfect euphemism. It let people announce pregnancy without saying anything explicit about reproduction or sexuality. You could hint at the most natural biological process in the world without actually naming it. Victorian prudishness wrapped in scientific language. The phrase created this weird cultural bubble. Everyone knew what it meant, but nobody talked about what it actually involved. It's like if we all agreed to call chemotherapy "feeding the dragons" and then spent decades using that phrase without ever acknowledging that dragons don't exist. The metaphor became more real than the reality. The rabbit died was pregnancy. The actual rabbit, the actual death, that was just background noise that polite people didn't mention. Society had convinced itself this was a necessary evil. Medical progress required sacrifice. The greater good justified individual animal deaths. It's the same logic that justified all kinds of questionable experiments throughout the 20th century. We wanted knowledge, we wanted certainty, we wanted control over biological processes that had been mysterious for millennia. If that meant killing rabbits, Well, rabbits weren't people. The math seemed simple enough. Human knowledge trumped animal lives. No debate needed. Looking back, it's almost surreal how completely this phrase saturated American culture. From medical textbooks, to rock songs, to comedy films, all built on this foundation of systematic animal death that nobody wanted to examine too closely. The disconnect between the cultural meaning and the biological reality reveals something uncomfortable about how we process scientific advancement. We want the benefits. We don't want to think about the costs. Sometimes ignorance isn't bliss, it's just convenient. The humane innovation and its unforeseen havoc. By the 1940s, those rabbit pregnancy tests were working perfectly. Too perfectly, actually. Laboratories couldn't keep up with demand. Thousands of women needed tests every week, which meant thousands of dead rabbits. The whole system was buckling under its own success. Then British zoologist Lancelot Hogben had what seemed like a brilliant idea. What if you didn't have to kill the test animal? What if you could just watch it react? Enter the African clawed frog. Hogben's discovery was elegant in its simplicity. Take a female African clawed frog, inject it with urine from a potentially pregnant woman, then wait. If that urine contained pregnancy hormones, something magical happened within 8 to 12 hours. The frog would start laying eggs. No surgery required, no dissection, no death. You could literally watch the result happen in real time. The same frog could be used over and over again for multiple tests. It seemed like the perfect humane solution. Laboratories across Europe and North America went crazy for these frogs. Thousands of African clawed frogs were shipped overseas to meet the growing demand for pregnancy testing. Finally, scientists thought, we've found a way to advance medical knowledge without the constant animal sacrifice. The frogs lived comfortable lives in laboratory tanks, doing their job of egg-laying on command. It was efficient, accurate, and nobody had to die. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything, as it turned out. The problem wasn't the frogs themselves. African clawed frogs are actually pretty harmless. The problem was what they were carrying. These innocent-looking amphibians harboured a microscopic stowaway that would become one of the most devastating ecological disasters of the 20th century. A fungus called Batrachoctrium dendropatidis. Try saying that 5 times fast. This fungus was native to Africa, where local frog populations had evolved some resistance to it. But North American and European amphibians, they had no defences whatsoever. Now, laboratory frogs don't just magically escape on their own. But accidents happen. A tank gets knocked over during cleaning. A graduate student forgets to secure a lid properly. A frog jumps out during routine handling. Maybe a few dozen escaped over the years across all the laboratories using them. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't sound like much. But when those escaped frogs reached local waterways, they brought their deadly passenger with them. The fungus began its silent march through native amphibian populations. Batrachoctrium dendropatidis attacks amphibian skin, the organ frogs and salamanders use for breathing and regulating water balance. Infected animals literally suffocate as their skin thickens and stops functioning. The fungus spreads through water, soil, and direct contact between animals. Once it establishes itself in a habitat, it's nearly impossible to eliminate. Native frogs had no evolutionary experience with this pathogen. They started dying en masse, and nobody understood why until decades later, when scientists finally identified the culprit. The scale of the devastation is staggering. This single fungus, inadvertently spread by escaped pregnancy test frogs, is now blamed for contributing to the extinctions and population crashes of hundreds of amphibian species across multiple continents. Mountain yellow-legged frogs in California, Panamanian golden frogs, European common toads, Australian gastric brooding frogs, species that had survived ice ages and countless natural disasters were wiped out by a microscopic organism that hitched a ride on laboratory animals imported for medical testing. The irony is devastating when you think about it. Scientists developed frog testing specifically to avoid killing animals during pregnancy tests. They thought they were being more humane, more ethical. Instead, they accidentally triggered one of the largest mass extinction events in recent history. Millions of wild amphibians died because researchers wanted to save a few thousand laboratory rabbits. It's a perfect example of how good intentions can have catastrophic unintended consequences. The road to ecological hell was paved with humane innovations. But wait, there's more to this story. Frogs weren't the only alternative to rabbit testing that scientists explored during this period. In 1947, an Argentinian researcher named Carlos Galli Mainini made another discovery. Male toads, it turned out, had their own reaction to pregnancy hormones. Inject a male toad with urine containing HCG, and within 3 hours, something interesting would happen. The toad would start producing sperm. Again, you could observe the result without killing the animal. Another seemingly humane breakthrough. The male toad test offered the same advantages as the frog method. Quick results, reusable test animals, no deaths required. Laboratories began using both species depending on availability and preference. Some researchers liked the reliability of frog egg production. Others preferred the speed of toad sperm release. Both methods seemed like massive improvements over the rabbit test. Both allowed the same animal to be used repeatedly. Both eliminated the need for surgical examination. And both, as we now know, carried hidden ecological risks. By the late 1940s, pregnancy testing was transforming from a rare, expensive procedure to routine medical care. Animal testing had made early pregnancy detection reliable for the first time in human history. But the true cost of this advancement wouldn't be understood for decades. As you drift off tonight, consider this paradox. Sometimes our most well-intentioned scientific breakthroughs create problems we never saw coming. Sweet dreams, knowing that modern pregnancy tests require nothing more than a simple plastic stick, from laboratories to home appliances. By the 1960s, something incredible was happening in pregnancy testing. Scientists were finally saying goodbye to the rabbits. The breakthrough came with immunoassay techniques. Basically, they figured out how to detect HCG directly without needing a living creature to react to it. This was huge. No more sacrificing thousands of animals every week. No more waiting days for results. Instead, they could use engineered antibodies that would recognize HCG, like a lock recognizing its key. Pure science fiction becoming reality. Here's how the new immunoassay method worked. Scientists would take antibodies, think of them as tiny molecular detectives, and engineer them specifically to hunt down HCG molecules. When these antibodies found HCG in urine, they'd bind to it, creating a detectable reaction. One popular technique involved attaching HCG to sheep's blood cells, then mixing those cells with the engineered antibodies and a woman's urine sample. If she was pregnant, you could actually see the blood cells clumping together. Brilliant, right? The advantages were staggering. No animals died. Results came back in hours instead of days. The accuracy remained just as high, sometimes even better than the rabbit tests. Laboratories could process dozens of samples simultaneously instead of needing separate animals for each woman. But here's what really mattered. This technology was portable. You didn't need a full laboratory with animal facilities anymore. These tests could theoretically be done anywhere. And that's where our next revolutionary figure enters the story. Meet Margaret Crane, 26 years old, working as a designer at a pharmaceutical company in 1967. While male scientists were perfecting immunoassay techniques in their laboratories, Crane was asking a different question entirely. Why did women need to visit doctors and laboratories at all? Why couldn't they test for pregnancy themselves, privately, at home? It seems obvious now, but back then, revolutionary thinking. Most people assumed pregnancy testing required professional medical supervision. Crane disagreed. Crane faced enormous skepticism from her colleagues. The medical establishment wasn't thrilled about removing doctors from the pregnancy confirmation process. There were concerns about accuracy, about women misinterpreting results, about the supposed complexity of immunoassay techniques. But Crane kept pushing. She believed women were smart enough to follow instructions and deserved privacy in such intimate matters. Her prototype would prove revolutionary, though she'd never see a penny from it since she developed it as a company employee. The design challenges were massive. How do you package immunoassay technology for home use? The chemistry had to be stable, the instructions foolproof, the results unmistakable. Crane's prototype included test tubes, droppers, purified water, and compounds containing sheep's blood cells. The process took about 2 hours and required careful timing. Not exactly simple, but compared to visiting a doctor, waiting days, and sacrificing rabbits, this was revolutionary. Women could know privately, immediately, in their own homes. The first home pregnancy test worked like this. You'd collect your urine, mix it with the provided compounds, wait for reactions to occur, then observe whether blood cells clump together or remain separate. Clumping meant pregnancy. No clumping meant no pregnancy. It sounds complicated, but remember, this was 1967. The fact that ordinary women could perform immunoassay techniques in their kitchens was absolutely mind-blowing. Laboratory science had come home. The rabbit era was officially ending, but getting from prototype to store shelves took years. Regulatory approval, manufacturing challenges, marketing concerns. The pharmaceutical industry moved slowly. Many executives questioned whether women actually wanted to test themselves at home. Wouldn't they prefer professional medical guidance? This attitude reveals so much about 1960s assumptions regarding women's capabilities and desires for autonomy. Crane's vision was ahead of its time, but the time was coming fast. The implications were staggering. Home testing would eliminate doctor visits for pregnancy confirmation. Women in rural areas, women without reliable healthcare access, women seeking privacy, suddenly they'd have options. The technology also promised to be cheaper than laboratory tests. No paying for doctor consultations, no laboratory fees, no animal maintenance costs. Just buy a kit, follow instructions, get results. Independence through chemistry. Freedom through science. The rabbit test's days were numbered. By the early 1970s, momentum was building. Women's liberation movements were demanding reproductive autonomy. The birth control pill had given women control over prevention. Now they wanted control over detection too. Home pregnancy testing represented more than convenience. It was about privacy, dignity, and the radical idea that women could manage their own reproductive health without constant medical supervision. Margaret Crane's prototype was becoming a feminist revolution disguised as a consumer product. The stage was set perfectly. Immunoassay technology had proven reliable. Crane's prototype had demonstrated home testing feasibility. Consumer demand was growing. Regulatory pathways were becoming clearer. All the pieces were aligning for a complete transformation in how women would discover pregnancy. The year 1978 was approaching fast, and with it, the widespread availability of home pregnancy tests across America. The rabbit had died for the last time. The future was plastic sticks and instant answers. The epic transformation of pregnancy tests. By the 1960s, something had to change. Laboratories couldn't keep up with demand for test animals. Thousands of women needed pregnancy tests every week, which meant thousands of rabbits dying. Scientists knew there had to be a better way. The breakthrough came from understanding exactly what they were looking for. SEG, that pregnancy hormone. Instead of injecting it into living creatures and watching their ovaries react, what if they could detect it directly? What if they could skip the whole animal sacrifice part entirely? The answer was closer than anyone imagined. Researchers developed something called immunoassay techniques. Basically, they figured out how to engineer antibodies that would recognize HCG and bind to it. One method involved attaching HCG to sheep's blood cells, then mixing those cells with the engineered antibodies and human urine. If the woman was pregnant, the HCG in her urine would interfere with the binding process. You could tell by watching whether the blood cells clumped together or stayed separate. No killing required, no waiting for ovaries to swell, just chemistry doing its thing in a test tube. But here's where it gets really interesting. In 1967, a 26-year-old designer named Margaret Crane was working for a pharmaceutical company. She had this wild idea: what if women could test themselves at home? No doctor visits, no laboratory fees, no waiting anxiously by the phone for results. She designed the first home pregnancy test prototype. Think about that for a second. A young woman, probably dealing with her own reproductive questions, creating something that would change millions of lives. Her name's on the patent, but she never earned a penny from it. The first consumer home pregnancy test hit the market in Canada in 1971. By 1978, you could buy one in any American drugstore. But these weren't the simple sticks we know today. Oh no, these were complicated affairs that looked like chemistry sets. You needed 2 hours, multiple vials of purified water, test tubes, droppers, and various compounds including, wait for it, sheep's blood. Women had to follow detailed instructions like they were conducting lab experiments in their bathrooms. But here's the thing, they worked. And more importantly, they gave women privacy and control. The evolution from those early home kits to modern pregnancy tests is mind-blowing. We went from complex laboratory procedures requiring sheep's blood and specialized equipment to something so simple a teenager can figure it out in 30 seconds. Modern tests use advanced immunoassay technology, but they've packaged it into a plastic stick about the size of your thumb. You pee on one end, wait a few minutes, and get your answer. No mixing chemicals, no timing multiple steps, no interpreting complex reactions, just a line or a plus sign or the word pregnant. Here's what really gets me about modern pregnancy tests. They're more accurate than anything doctors had access to 50 years ago. These little plastic sticks can detect pregnancy as early as 5 days before a missed period. 5 days, with 99% accuracy. That's more reliable than the rabbit tests that cost hundreds of dollars in today's money. And you can buy a pregnancy test for $3 at the dollar store. $3 versus what used to cost several hundred. Available 24/7 versus waiting for doctor appointments and laboratory schedules. The transformation is staggering. But the real revolution isn't just technical, it's emotional. Imagine being a woman in 1935, sitting in that doctor's office, completely dependent on his phone call to the laboratory. Your future hanging on whether some rabbit's ovaries swelled up after being injected with your urine, the powerlessness of it, the expense, the indignity. Now compare that to today. A woman can walk into any pharmacy, buy a test, and know her status in 5 minutes, in private, without involving doctors or laboratories, or explaining herself to anyone. That's not just medical progress, that's freedom. The accessibility factor is huge. In the 1940s and 50s, only middle-class and wealthy women could afford pregnancy testing. Working-class women waited months, relying on missed periods and physical symptoms. But modern pregnancy tests democratized this knowledge. A teenager with babysitting money can know her status. A woman in a rural area doesn't need access to specialized laboratories. Whether you're a CEO or working minimum wage, the same technology is available to you for pocket change. That's revolutionary in ways we don't always appreciate. Think about what this means for women's life planning. In Victorian times, pregnancy was something that happened to you, revealed itself gradually, and you dealt with it when you couldn't ignore it anymore. Now, women can know almost immediately and make informed decisions. Whether that's starting prenatal care early, making career adjustments, or having difficult conversations with partners, knowledge creates options. The pregnancy test transformed from a luxury diagnostic procedure available only to the wealthy into a basic tool of reproductive autonomy. That shift changed everything. There's something almost poetic about how the story ends. We started with ancient methods, mixing urine with wine, watching for mysterious films forming on stored samples. We moved through Victorian pseudoscience with its pellicle methods and pulse checking. We endured decades of animal sacrifice, thousands of rabbits, mice, frogs and toads, dying so women could know a little sooner, a little more certainly, and we arrived at a plastic stick, simple, cheap, accurate, humane. Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most compassionate one. As you fall asleep tonight, here's your final thought. Somewhere right now, a woman is holding a pregnancy test, watching for that second line to appear. She's getting an answer in minutes that would have taken weeks or months for her grandmother. No rabbits are dying for her knowledge. No expensive laboratory procedures. No dependence on male doctors interpreting her body for her. Just a woman, a simple test and certainty. From sacrificial rabbits to plastic sticks, that's human progress at its finest. Sleep well, knowing we got this one right. The story a test can tell. Here's what gets me about this whole rabbit testing thing. We created this massive system where thousands of animals died every year, just so women could know they were pregnant a few weeks earlier. And somehow nobody talked about it. The phrase "the rabbit died" became this cheerful announcement in gossip columns and comedy routines. But behind those 3 words was this entire hidden world of laboratory sacrifice that society just accepted, without question. Think about the numbers for a second. From the 1920s through the early 1960s, we're talking about tens of thousands of rabbits annually. Mice, frogs, toads too. All dying so women could get early confirmation of pregnancy. This wasn't some fringe medical practice. This was mainstream healthcare. Every major hospital, every decent-sized laboratory had rooms full of test animals. The demand was so high that labs struggled to keep enough rabbits on hand. And here's the ironic part. The phrase that became so embedded in American culture was based on a complete misunderstanding. People thought the rabbit only died if you were pregnant. Wrong. The rabbit always died. Every single test meant dissection, whether positive or negative. But somehow this brutal reality got softened into this almost whimsical expression. The rabbit died sounded gentle, inevitable, natural. It was anything but. This tells us something fascinating about Victorian attitudes that lasted well into the 20th century. Society was comfortable with "the rabbit died" because it avoided saying pregnant directly. Even in the 1950s, there was still this delicate dance around reproduction. You could reference animal death more easily than human pregnancy. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Death was more acceptable than birth in polite conversation. The cultural impact was huge. You find "the rabbit died" everywhere: noir novels about murder cases, Aerosmith lyrics, comedy films, celebrity pregnancy announcements. It became this coded language that everyone understood but nobody really questioned. Joan Rivers's pregnancy announced in gossip columns. Characters in detective stories using it as shorthand. This medical procedure had become part of the American vocabulary without anyone examining what it actually meant. But here's what really changed everything. This gave women unprecedented control over their own bodies and futures. For the first time in human history, you could know you were pregnant within days of a missed period. Not months later when you started showing. Days. This was revolutionary. It meant prenatal care could start immediately. Life plans could be made. Difficult decisions could be faced while there were still options. The class divide was stark though. These tests cost $10 to $15 in 1940s money. That's several $100s today. Only middle-class and wealthy women could afford early pregnancy confirmation. Working class women still waited and hoped and worried, relying on missed periods and morning sickness. The rabbits died for those who could pay. Everyone else lived with uncertainty, just like their grandmothers had. And nobody was asking the bigger questions. Like, is there a better way? Could we develop something that doesn't require killing animals? The medical establishment just accepted this as the cost of progress. Thousands of rabbits dying annually. That's just how science works. The relentless push forward, leaving a trail of small bodies behind. Progress at any price, even when that price included systematic animal sacrifice nobody talked about. The environmental cost was staggering too. When labs started importing African clawed frogs as a more humane alternative, some escaped. They carried deadly fungus that's still wiping out native frog populations today. Species extinctions we're dealing with right now trace back to 1940s pregnancy testing. That's the kind of unintended consequence nobody saw coming, or maybe nobody bothered looking that far ahead. Today's pregnancy tests are miracles of simplicity. A few drops of urine, a plastic stick, results in minutes. 99% accurate, costs a few dollars. No rabbits die, no frogs get imported, no mice get dissected. Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most humane one, but it took decades of animal sacrifice before we got there. Progress, it's messier than we like to admit. The journey from rabbits to reassurance. So here we are, the final chapter of this wild, sometimes heartbreaking story. We've travelled from ancient Egypt to Victorian London, through laboratories filled with dying rabbits, and now we need to talk about what it all means. Because this isn't just a story about weird medical procedures. It's about something much deeper. It's about women fighting for one simple thing, the right to know what's happening inside their own bodies. And that fight, it changed everything. Think about that transformation for a second. In 1935, a woman suspected she was pregnant. She had to visit a doctor, pay a small fortune, wait days for results, and know that somewhere a rabbit died just to give her an answer. By 1978, she could walk into any drugstore, buy a simple kit, and know within hours. Same question, same need for certainty, completely different world. The shift happened so fast that most people didn't even notice we'd moved past the rabbit era. Margaret Crane never got rich from revolutionizing pregnancy testing. She was 26, working for a pharmaceutical company, when she designed that first home test prototype in 1967. Her name's on the patent, but as an employee, she earned nothing extra from her breakthrough. Think about that. The woman who freed millions of women from doctor visits and rabbit sacrifices, she never saw a penny in profit. Just her regular salary and the quiet satisfaction of changing the world. But Margaret's invention did something profound. It handed control back to women. No more waiting rooms. No more explaining to male doctors why you needed to know. No more expensive laboratory fees. Just you, a plastic stick, and an answer in minutes. Privacy, autonomy, power. For the first time in human history, pregnancy testing became something women could do for themselves, by themselves, whenever they needed to know. That's revolutionary when you really think about it. Picture that anxious woman from 1935 again, sitting in her doctor's office, hands folded, waiting to hear if the rabbit died. Now picture her great-granddaughter today. She doesn't need anyone's permission. She doesn't need to explain herself. She buys a test, goes home, gets her answer. Same hopes, same fears, same desperate need to know, but completely different relationship with that knowledge. The rabbit lady had to beg for information about her own body. Her descendant just knows. There's something beautiful about that connection across generations. Millions of women, separated by decades, united by that same heart-stopping moment of waiting. The Victorian woman mixing her urine with wine. The 1940s woman hearing about her rabbit. The modern woman staring at a plastic stick, counting seconds. Different methods, same emotion, same desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world, that shared experience. It connects us all across time. This whole convoluted history, rabbits dying, frogs laying eggs, mice being dissected, it's actually a perfect symbol of women's relationship with medicine. For centuries, we accepted bizarre, expensive, sometimes cruel procedures because they were the only option. We didn't demand better because we didn't think we could. But every small improvement, every advance, was really women saying, we deserve better, we deserve answers, we deserve control over our own bodies and our own futures. The quest for certainty never really ended. It just got easier, more humane, more private. Women today still have that same bone-deep need to know, to plan, to prepare. The difference is that now we can satisfy that need without asking permission, without explaining ourselves, without killing rabbits. Progress isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just making something complicated into something simple, something expensive into something affordable, something public into something private. And isn't that remarkable? We went from throwing puppies at walls to see if they'd stick. Okay, that wasn't real, but remember those ancient Egyptian women urinating on grain? We went from complete guesswork to laboratory-grade accuracy you can get at any corner store, from months of uncertainty to minutes of waiting, from thousands of dollars to a few bucks, from depending on doctors to complete independence. That's not just medical progress, that's women claiming their power. The shift to modern testing happened fast, once researchers figured out antibody detection. By the late 1960s, you could test for pregnancy without killing anything. Margaret Crane designed the first home pregnancy test in 1967. She got her name on the patent, but never saw a penny in profits. Still, her simple plastic stick design freed women from doctors' offices and laboratory schedules, and freed countless animals from death sentences. Margaret Crane died in 2020, age 79. The world barely noticed. No grand obituaries celebrating the woman who changed how half the population relates to their own bodies. Just a quiet passing of someone who'd done something extraordinary and never asked for credit. But her legacy lives on. Every time a woman takes control of her reproductive knowledge, every time someone gets answers on their own terms, in their own time, in their own space. So as you drift off tonight, remember this. The story of pregnancy testing is really the story of women refusing to accept. You'll just have to wait and see. It's about demanding certainty in a world that often denies women agency. From ancient Egypt to modern drugstores, it's been the same fight, the same insistence that our bodies, our futures, our choices deserve reliable information. Sweet dreams, knowing that fight continues and we're winning. No more rabbits required.